Welcome back. Sharing war stories has been a time-honored tradition passed down from obviously generation to generation, and most of the accounts obviously revolve around combat and more specifically combat experiences of men. In her new book, Soldier Girls, the battles of three women at home and at war, Helen Thorpe, she shares the stories of those women who were deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq. The book, it discusses how their service affected not only their lives, but also their families and friendships. Pseudonyms, they were used in the book for some of the women who wanted to keep their identities private. Helen Thorpe, she sat down with me earlier this afternoon to discuss her inspirational piece of work. We'll set the stage for us here because you set out to talk to women on the front lines here, and you were able to get very close for a 12-year period with three women from the Indiana National Guard, and you really stepped this through from when they originally signed up, which was before 9/11, to how that fateful day changed obviously everyone's lives, particularly theirs, and what they would see thereafter.
Absolutely. You know, they had anticipated being part-time soldiers 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks in the summer. And then after 9/11, they suddenly found themselves facing year-long deployments. They went to Afghanistan together, and then two of the women went to Iraq as well. And I actually met them after they returned from Iraq, but they were able to share with me many diaries, letters, emails, even their medical records and therapy notes. So we were able to really reconstruct what their entire decade had been like since 9/11.
And these three women couldn't be more different, but as we get throughout the book, also very similar. Desma Brooks, single mother, 3 kids here. Then you have Michelle Fisher, young lady who voted for Ralph Nader, wears the hemp ankle bracelet against the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And then you have Debbie Helton. She a grandmother. She had some military history in her family here. So they all came to this in different ways, none of them thinking they'd ever see the battlefield, but nonetheless, very different people.
Yeah, that's a great summary. There is 30 years difference in age from the youngest, Michelle, to Debbie, who's the oldest of the 3. And Debbie actually becomes a grandmother during their deployment to Afghanistan. And of course, Desma Brooks, in the middle, age-wise, is a single mother with 3 children. As you mentioned, they're really different in terms of their outlook. So for Debbie, it was kind of the highlight of her life, whereas Michelle, who opposed the wars, was sort of struggling the whole time in a state of internal conflict.
Let's talk about their deployments and the experiences they faced. All of them were at Camp Phoenix in Afghanistan, which I guess would be described as a safer environment compared to a lot of other outposts there, but nonetheless, talk about what they encountered, both in acceptance or lack thereof, some of the stresses attached to the day-to-day life there, and how it maybe was very different than what they thought it would be like.
Sure. So when they were in Afghanistan, you're absolutely right. They were at Camp Phoenix, which was in Kabul. And Desma, during that deployment, had a relatively safe job. She had a desk job. A few years later, when they go to Iraq, however, you see Desma no longer doing a safe desk job, relatively safe. I mean, they're still in a war zone, but relatively speaking, safer. She is now driving a gun truck, doing convoy security, and she has been transferred into a previously all-male field artillery regiment. And she did hit a roadside bomb, came back home with traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress disorder, and struggled to overcome those.
And she also struggled before that to gain acceptance in the unit, right? Which can be said of so many other women in there, that they're looked at best as a curiosity and often treated much worse than that.
Absolutely. And you see her spend time in 2 different previously all-male units. So first, she's transferred into an infantry regiment, and there she's actually treated so coldly that she decides she can't stay. It's not a comfortable environment. She requests a transfer. And in the field artillery regiment, you see her over time really win the respect of her male colleagues. She actually forms lifelong bonds with them. You see her reunite with them when she's back home again in Indiana, and they're very meaningful encounters. And I interviewed some of those men, and the things that they said about her were so warm, and you could tell that they had kind of formed family bonds with her.
You know, you take throughout this book that in so many cases, Helen, that there is, if you want to get your hands, whether it be alcohol or drugs, you can. And it's a sexually charged environment, but nonetheless, with so much attention back home on both sexual harassment and assaults in the military as well, you kind of get, when you get through this book, that there are environments that are almost created that foster it. Forget about that it can happen, and it's almost not encouraged, but you totally see how they get from point A to point B.
Yeah, I felt the same way when I was interviewing the women. I appreciate your summary of it. When I was interviewing them, I thought, oh, I'm starting to understand why we're seeing really high rates of assault on military posts. They were describing an environment in which the gender ratio was so skewed, women were so rare, that they were getting incredible degree of attention from some of the all-male units they were serving alongside. They were also in an environment where everybody was sometimes frightened. You know, RPGs might be coming in or alarms going off. It was a stressful environment. People were far away from their homes and their families. And although alcohol was banned, if they did, you know, if people did get their hands on alcohol, things could happen that were, you know, really problematic, from assault to even you see one woman accuse another soldier of rape.
You really end up rooting for these three women you profile, and they didn't have an easy time of it when they came home. So many things that we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder. There were panic attacks that they had. They had a tough time reverting back to civilian life. Give an idea from our viewers some of the experiences that these women ran into that maybe even they were surprised they couldn't handle.
Yeah. You see all three women struggle. You know, for example, Michelle walks into a Target and she's just back. She's trying to shop for, she's going to return to college, and she's trying to shop for what she needs to go back to school. And she finds herself in the toilet paper aisle, and there's 25 different brands of toilet paper. Her friend who's there with her leaves her alone, and suddenly she is just awash in panic. She can't make simple choices. She's overwhelmed by being in this environment. She hasn't seen all of these consumer goods in a really long time, and she has to kind of exit the store in order to get her bearings again and calm down. But it's a really hard transition back home after being overseas. Overseas, they're in an environment where everybody is told what to do all the time, and suddenly they're needing to make lots of independent decisions on their own.
They all would do it again, it seems. For different reasons, all of them look back with pride on their service.
It was interesting for me to learn that the number one reason that people in the service are calling the GI rights hotline right now has to do with an experience that Desma had, where she came back home with post-traumatic stress disorder, and then the military itself started to view her as a problem. Her weapon was taken away. She was put on profile, as they call it. And she ultimately sought a medical retirement because she couldn't really be a full soldier anymore. And yet she does look back on both of her deployments with pride. Debbie Helton, her colleague, views the deployments as the highlight of her life, no question. And even Michelle, who opposed both of the wars, didn't want to be in Afghanistan originally. She found the experience of getting to spend that year in Afghanistan so transforming that when she gets home, she says she wouldn't trade that year for anything. So they do all view the experience as something they treasure.
Well, again, the book is called Soldier Girls, and I'll just say from my vantage point, it gives an insight, not just on the gender perspective, but it gives an insight to what it's like there that at least I hadn't gotten before. It's a terrific book, Helen.
Thank you so much.
And coming up next, everyone, we will switch gears and take a look at headlines making news in the Hudson Valley. That when we return.